Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my God of War, God Difficulty Pain Run. We are entering the desert with the Sirens and the infinitely spawning Minotaurs. So you know it's going to be fun when you can barely see the screen thanks to the sandstorm, and we move into one of the worst parts of the franchise in my opinion, a sequence I have always loathed since it came out. You'll also notice in the background that there is the bombastic music from the desert playing, and we can't quite have the game audio. There are 3 sequences in this video where I accidentally captured what I was listening to while I was recording, and it was mixed into the singular recording, and I couldn't isolate it. This one was just a podcast, not too offensive or innocuous. The other one was Dark Side Phil, which as you can imagine I don't really want on this video, but it comes in handy because it gives me something to talk about, because there's not really that much to discuss here other than this is where the no damage part of this run ended, because I just do not like this sequence, and I wish I could tell you that I was in the right mood to do this project, but I totally wasn't. Because let's face it guys, you know, Chains of Olympus is a frustrating game because of a couple of factors, but fundamentally most of the fights in that game are quite honest. You know, there's the gimmicks and the novelty moments don't overstay their welcome, and they don't demand of you something to the extent that the original God of War did. This game is filled with these encounters that have this particular just side logic going on that makes it different than the one before it, and I think the developers were in some ways kind of worried that people were going to get bored of just ripping things apart and attacking with the blades and everything, so they came up with these creative ideas to essentially challenge what your expectations of being Kratos was. And at the start here, you're in the desert, the mobility's bad, you kill the first Siren. If this game came out today, each of the Sirens would have a checkpoint, and there might be a bit more logic going on here. And you just heard the music come back in here. This is actually the game soundtrack right now. But it would make a little bit more sense if it was made in today, but this is back in the 2000s, man. This is PS2 days where they just didn't give a fuck sometimes. They were not afraid to bombard you and wreck you. And right here, these Minotaurs have the ability to do a ground shockwave. And the ground shockwave is almost invisible in this effect. So you can hear it, and if you're good enough and learned enough of the game, you can respond to it and do a lot of things. But it's just one of those things where half the shit you're going to get hit by is fast, hidden, or in some way like just what is even going on in that moment. And I would have no issue with this if I could see, and if the Siren didn't run away. But the whole point of this sequence is that it frustrates you into overextending and chasing the Siren to try and kill her, who I might admit has this auto dodge feature that she's hitting me with a bunch here because I'm very impatient. So you can never truly guarantee your hits to land on her unless you have a setup, which I'm sure the people do have setups for the Sirens. It's one of those things, people find setups for everything. But at this moment, I don't, you know, and I don't want to watch all the stuff on YouTube because I'll just imitate it. I want to kind of do my own way, and my own way is getting hit in the face 30 times and getting really fucking annoyed. And then afterwards, of course, when I did this sequence, after I banged my head against it for a while and just hated all of it, because I just don't like it. I watched some players do it to see what the different strategies were, and there is some really interesting stuff you can do here when it comes to baiting the Siren into getting stuck and putting her in certain circumstances. But it's just, I don't know, man. It's a very weird thing. There's a couple of loops people do to try and keep her taking damage and splash stunning her, and it's all good stuff. And of course you can see Zim doing this in several of his challenge runs and doing it very effectively, because that guy has a tolerance for this game's bullshit like no one, I would imagine. It's truly remarkable, and it's one of the things I think that's the most respectable. But it maybe if this was a few years back, I would have had a higher tolerance for what's happening, but now I don't. I have zero tolerance for garbage, and I think this sequence is garbage. I would go as far as to say if I could have skipped it by using an out of bounds and some speedrun tech, I would have done that. And I would have felt no shame in doing it, because I just don't think that this is fun. And I've come back to these games because I want to put them on the channel because I think that they're awesome. But challenge running God of War 1 is fucking miserable. It always was, and I don't understand how people can enjoy it. It's one of those things where I start to really dislike the game when I do it. And of course it probably comes from my lack of experience and my lack of skill with the game, and that's fair. But I like fights. I like a good fight, you know? You're going to see lots of good fights in this run. I don't like gimmicks. I never did. It's one of the reasons why I like the second game so much, and admittedly, I've said this before, I'll say it again, it still has its fair share of gimmicks, but here they just feel fucking stupid. Like, they turn up, and it's just like, well, what would you do if you were all wearing roller skates? It's like, I don't want to wear roller skates, I just want to fight, you know? Well, what would you do if all of a sudden you had to recite the Quran? Like, I don't want to fucking do that. I just want to tear the Minotaur to bits, you know? Like, and it might be boring, and maybe it's my lack of imagination, but as games get so far away from gameplay now, when I come back to the games that focused on gameplay, I want that core loop, I want that core experience. And God of War's core experience is really, really fun. It's one of the reasons I liked Chain of Olympus so much in spite of its terrible boss fights, because it just felt so clean and so streamlined, and it was so refreshing. But now, once you've killed one of the Sirens, you have to go and find the next one, and it involves running around this intentionally obfuscating desert until you can hear the song getting slightly louder, and then when you're in her vicinity, then you have to chase her and try and attack her and concede with the auto-dodging and all the weird shit. And then the Minotaurs kind of turn up and get kind of awkward. And you might be wondering, Chris, why don't you just kill the Minotaurs and get rid of them? Well, the reason you don't do that is because they just keep coming back. The one good thing about the Minotaurs being here all the time is that they can indeed give you back your resources if you're losing, and you should use them to get your life back if you need to. But it just gets so tedious fighting them. You know, normally I like fighting Minotaurs, I find them really fun, but in this context, I just get so irritated. And you could say I have sand in my vagina, and I do. It's just a scientific fact. Like, I could have easily not commentated this video because I hate it that much. And I don't want to come on these voiceovers and be like, guys, God of War 1 is a terrible game, you should fucking despise it. But this is what this level makes me feel. And I've had a bit of an interesting experiment with this, because the commentary's been done over a period of months. I recorded this in December, and we're now in July. And I've been coming back every so often and doing a video, so it's going to be like little snapshots from different parts of my year. And the one thing I do remember is when I was recording it, I was really frustrated with the game, and I was having a really awkward time, because I love God of War 1, I think it's a classic, I think it's one of those games that needs to be celebrated, but at the same time, I don't think pain is very fun in this game. I just don't think it suits it very well. And it's... Can it be done? Absolutely. Can it be done in a way that is super impressive? Yes. Yes, it can. Can I do it? No. I don't have the will for this one, because there's just too many things I dislike, and a lot of the hardest parts of the game, they always involve a caveat. Like, there's some fights coming up later on, which I'm really looking forward to, because I found them hard. And I found them hard in what I would categorize as a difficult fight. The type of things that I value when it comes to challenge. And those fights were a pleasure, even though they kicked my ass and I was there for a while. But for every fight like that, you have the spiky floor stuff. You have the fucking Architect's Tomb moving floor thing with the flame. Ooh, flame! Why? I don't fucking know. Flame. You know, for every fight that is legitimately kind of a nightmare in difficulty, you have a gimmick that's shit and it's really frustrating. You know, or something that's just really obscene until you learn it to a degree that is kind of excessive, I would say. And that's stuff like Ares. You know, Ares, is he a challenging fight? Not really. He's kind of fucking boring. But you have to hit him for 20 minutes unless you are one of the best players in the world. And not everybody can be that, you know, it takes a lot of time. And then stuff like the Clone War, which the Clone War is not going to be in this, guys. I had no intentions of really trying to do it. And I know that sounds crappy, and I do apologise to the people that wanted to see that. I honestly think I have the capacity to do it because of all the resources online that show you how to do it and teach you. You know, back in the old days, I only really saw Shinobi as tech for doing it, and it seemed pretty cool at the time, but it's been optimised now by Zim and some of the other people to the point where, like, people have done it no damage. I say people, it's one guy, and you know who it is. And if you don't, he might be in the comments for this. Please check him out. He's worth your time. Like, it's been turned into a science now, and if you can get yourself familiar with it and put in the time, And as long as you have a fortunate run where you're controlling them, I think with enough stubbornness it can be done. But there's a huge thing in it, isn't there, when it comes to motivation? Do you want to do it? If you want to do something, you'll do it. That's how I feel about it. If you really want to do it, you'll sit down and do it, and it can be done. No matter how hard it is, and no matter how many people tell you that you can't. But every so often, there's a challenge what you can acknowledge is just not in the right headspace for you. And I'm a firm believer too that you should always be in the right headspace for what you're trying to do. Because and you'll notice the music's gone back on now, guys. This is the Dark Side Phil tangent that I was listening to. And now we're back to a fight I actually really like. So this room here is classic Pandora's Temple, where there is this moving floor, and then at the end there's this spike wheel, this Masonic spike wheel thing. And if you do this fight conventionally, it's really awkward because the enemies are attacking you while you're blocking and you're moving on this conveyor, and then the block that you need to climb is going to move towards this crusher, and if it crushes it, you have to start from the beginning. So it's this setup of a situation that's very frustrating, much like the desert. However, there is knowledge here that can circumvent it, and it's knowledge that I don't have of the desert. So if you go to the crusher and you break it before you start this, the conveyor doesn't do anything, and then you can do this as just a straight up fight. And I think this, design-wise, is exceptional. This is everything that I love about God of War. It takes a situation that is quite gimmicky and quite silly, and it gives you the ability to use knowledge and experience with the game to change the stakes. And if you could do that in all the sequences I don't like, you would hear a significant less amount of bitching from me in this commentary. And you can just climb up here for free, which is really nice. But that takes us to this fight, so I had the intention of doing this fight no damage, guys, and this was the fight that told me that I wasn't good enough. And it stems from patience. This is a really, 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 really frustrating fight, and you have to be so patient to do it. Because at any moment, if you overextend, you're going to get clipped. And I don't know what it is about sirens in this game. I don't remember them in the sequels. I don't remember them being a problem. But I remember them in this one. In this one, they're really, really frustrating. And the thing that I struggled with when I was doing this is when they throw their fireballs at you, I thought movement was going to be something that would be super strong there. You know, like Ninja Gaiden when Alma fires her missiles at you, her projectiles, and you do all your movement tech to get around them. Whereas in this, it seems like if you stand there blocking, a lot of them just miss you. It's almost like the less you do, the safer you are. And at the time, when I was doing this, I did a practice run on stream where I played the game on I think it was on easy or normal, and I got to this fight under pain conditions. And even on easy, this fight was hard. And the way that God of War handles spawns is kind of interesting. And I think that I don't know if it's the limitation of the machine or of the disc, but instead of having all the sirens out, they have a set amount of sirens, and when one dies, they slot a new one in. They just replace it like a shark's tooth. And there's a certain amount of did I say titans then? I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say sirens. Maybe I did. But they replace the dead siren with a living one until you get rid of all the respawns. And then once there's no respawns, when you kill them, they stay dead. And you fight a handful of these chicks here. And it's really funny because when I first got to this sequence, and I was not that familiar... See there, where you kind of stand still and it all misses you? That's just so weird to me. But when I first got here, I was frustrated because I couldn't consistently bounce them. And if you can bounce them, and if you get lucky, and if they try to stand there, and you can get the launch off your Ascension, or off your Plume, or off whatever you're trying to do, your single triangle, you can have a lot of fun with these enemies, because you can bounce them into the ground, you can try to use her, Orion's Harpoon to get some collision. There's a lot of things you can do. Even the fireballs hit the other sisters as well, so that's kind of cool. It's really nice, the idea of them hitting each other, that can help you out. So if you do get lucky, you can have a much easier fight here, but if you get unlucky, it can be a fucking nightmare. And the rules of some of the Minotaurs is that when they're doing something or when they're in recovery, if you try to launch them, 10 to 1 you get a launch. If you do it outside of those moments, they'll have some kind of mechanism to stop that from happening. And the Siren works in a similar way, where if you try to launch her at a bad time, she has all these things she can do to stop that from happening. But if you know the times when to do it, you can get away with bouncing. And if you get a good bounce, you can then lead it into, for instance, looping them in the air like this. And that's a really good strategy, but the one fear is what happened then. If you get sucked in by one of them from off screen, it becomes really difficult then to regain your block, because reguarding after that suction is kind of awkward. So this turns into a big slugfest. If you're just doing this as a standard challenge, when you kill the Sirens, they do have a tendency to drop some healing, and even though this is on God mode, which is the hardest difficulty, the enemies don't hit as hard as you think they would, especially these ones. And I feel like the developers kind of understood that this is kind of a shitty fight and it's really annoying, so they didn't want to go too ham with them, like killing you in 2 hits. So the amount of mistakes you can make before you do lose is surprisingly high. But after I did it, I went and I watched Zim do it, and it's funny to see, isn't it, that we weren't doing anything all that dissimilar, it's just he was doing it in a much more intelligent and elegant way. You know, he was launching them at the right times. He was being defensive, and the moment he saw an opening, because he knew which ones were real openings and which ones were fake, he got them into an area where he needed them, and then he capitalized on it. And that's pure experience, that, you know? That's a man who really, really studies God of War and does a great job in capturing those runs, and they're really good to watch. You can't expect to do that if you're just going to play the game twice and then move on to another project, you know? You can't develop that kind of eye and that kind of understanding. Sure, you can get some experience and you can get some knowledge. You know, I've been challenge running God of War for 20 years now, pretty much. And that's a long time. And of course, I've not done it every year, and I've not done it as much as some people have, but I have done it, so there's a lot of that legacy information that you do remember. But there's a difference between being active on a game and being warm and being really familiar and being someone who's played it a ton but you haven't played it in a while. Because when you come back, sure, you've got some of those old fangs that you wielded before, but you're not the same wolf that you were when you were really into the game. And that's one of the fun things at reawakening those skills and learning new skills. And that's why I did Chains of Olympus before I came to this one, because I knew Chains of Olympus was an easier ride, and I knew that it was going to be a bit more fun for me personally. But it's interesting, isn't it, that this game, Kratos moves very specifically in this game. He doesn't have a lot of the tools he gets later on, and if you're used to those later games, when you come back to this one, it does feel a bit awkward. But the cool thing is, as awkward as you might think it feels, it's still very responsive, it's still very fun, and then the huge thing to me is it's the Orion's Harpoon. Orion's Harpoon in this game is so skillful compared to some of the later ones, and I don't know why they did that. I don't know why they made Orion so automated and so, like, unfun compared to what it is here. Like, you can give Kratos to an average player, and they might never even use that move. You can give this character to a really good player, and they'll take one Legionnaire, and they'll kill all the other Legionnaires with him, just by bouncing him. And that's the distinction of knowing the importance of the collision, and in knowing the importance of Orion, and knowing the importance of how to scoop somebody, turn around and drop them where you need them to be. And that's a modifier between those two tiers of players. And they get rid of that in the later games in many ways, and I just don't understand why. Thank you for watching. You take care now.